I hadn't thought about Chesterton for a long time, but I'll adapt a quote from Chesterton about Christianity, about humanity, which is humanity hasn't been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. So transhumanism is fundamentally what happens when you have an incredibly philosophically lazy culture with an enormous amount of financial and technological power. And then you get essentially infantile conceptualizing with nuclear and beyond level power resource allocation to those same infantile concepts. And that's very important, because I don't mean that as a put down. I mean, if you're thinking about this just psychoanalytically, and you ask yourself, per your question about adulthood and maturation and what human adults are, there's actually a really deep question, which is, are we in general talking to adults or children? Which raises the question of, like, what is an adult and a child? And in the modernist progressivist narrative that underlies transhumanism, there's a contempt for gendered women and of any kind, a contempt for the trans movement, like you can see in Elon Musk, a contempt for children in a certain sense. Not in the sense that every like good tech dad is not in some ways a kind of conservative, but there's a general contempt of children in the history of male culture, because children are embarrassing to men. They don't understand them. They're the world of women. They don't want to think about when they were children, because power is important to male masculine culture constructs. So ultimately, actually, there's a deep issue here about what is the child. And that brings us right to the new year. And I think this is connected to humanity very, very deeply, because I'm teaching a course right now, the first public course in the philosophy of science I've taught, on Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. That's my current course on YouTube. And it's going to set up my kind of critical social epistemology work for the public. And one of the things I've been struck by about Kuhn, like this is the lecture I'm about to record today, I think lecture 5 in the series, is about novelty. Really, the entire history of science and the problem it poses is how you make sense of novelty when the concept of knowledge is that you got it right and therefore it doesn't need to change. So you see, you can take the concept of novelty and put it through any axis in philosophy, whether epistemology, philosophy of science, ethics, and it's a problem. If you figured things out, the future shouldn't be different unless it's catastrophically bad. And from that standpoint, you generate immediately what isn't a conservative impulse. It's a very traditional impulse. It's not conservative. I'm also preparing a course on Dugin that I hope to be ready to teach by 2025.
No. What?
So I'm reading a ton of Dugin, and because he's important, but this is something I'm very struck by, is Dugin as a Russian philosopher is very sensitive to the radicality of the idea of novelty being normal. And he sees this as very Western and extremely modern, which is very true. And it's also a very deep theological difference. There's a kind of apocalyptic philosophical movement in antiquity that we call part of now Christianity. But Eastern Orthodoxy isn't like that. Eastern Orthodoxy is much more traditionally Platonic. And what's good is eternal or unchanging or somehow united to that. And so the question about what's good about anything new is, to me, the ultimate question moderns should force themselves to ask, because it's the one we take for granted, but it's the one that makes us the weirdos in the whole history of society and human culture. And so there is, I think, transhumanism is partly a frightening impulse that a child reacts to very rationally as a child, which is the future is uncontrollable. I can't even comprehend the present. I know fuck all about the past. And so the only way I can psychologically stabilize my world is to imagine that I can unilaterally construct the future out of my own agency. So I view this psychoanalytically as, first of all, transhumanism is a very scared psychic child. The modern human is incredibly infantile, I think, in terms of its, and there's an enormous regressive motion when you get towards apocalyptic cultural downturns like we're in, where the economy is very unstable and only really wealthy people can capitalize on that instability. So I think transhumanism in that sense is a truly new form of religion, like the UFO movement, because we need a type of assurance in the face of the incomprehensibility of the world that we have partly inherited, that we don't understand and created. And I think, therefore, focusing on why the concept of humanity is already trying to be transcended, when the people who want to transcend it clearly haven't understood it in any sense. They can't give you the most minimum accurate account of why did the concept of humanity emerge? What's unique about it, right? So that's a lot, but maybe I'll just stop there with the kind of scattershot response, where I think those are some of the big thematic issues actually connected. Novelty, kind of the psychological issue of maturity and what we're really dealing with philosophically, and how do we How do we respectfully acknowledge that sometimes we are talking to infants without being condescending? Because we recognize sometimes maybe we're being an infant and we don't know it when someone's, say, triggering a kind of complex, if you want to use that language. But I do think it's a grave mistake to treat transhumanism as the product of mature, well-adjusted minds. That is a grave mistake. Transhumanism is the product of a kind of unbelievably masculine culture that has very little emotional self-understanding, very little understanding of the world of nature, very little understanding of the world of the body, and very little understanding of the world of human history. It's the kind of incredible bias of engineering culture taken to the nth degree, combined with the crudest forms of Enlightenment Christian eschatology.